master's hands for twiddling the strings of moral right and wrong.
To me, it's a way of life.
This season, we will focus on the importance of the device attached to every hand. Welcome to the Shepherd's Cast. This content may not be suitable for some listeners. Good morning, good evening, and good night, my flock. Welcome to the Shepherd's Cast, the podcast where I read horror short stories and explain the inspiration for why I wrote them. Today, we'll be covering the importance of advertisement for small businesses. But before we get into that, as always, I have some announcements. First of all, if you can't tell by the sound of my voice, I am sick. That is why this episode has taken me so long to finish. Yeah, I'm going to go with that as an excuse. Well, it's not just that. It's been the fact that I've been getting these books out to people, trying to make some sales now that we are officially selling books. As of right now, I have sold over 50 copies of the book, and I haven't even done any events yet. I have a couple things that I'm hoping to do, but I'm still waiting on responses from local bookstores and from a festival I would like to attend. As for a couple of the festivals I wanted to do this year, I did not have a book out in time to fill out their registrations. So that will be a project for next year. Thank you to everybody who did buy the book. I've been having a lot of fun signing them, putting personalized notes in some of them. It's really great to finally have a physical product out there in the world. To officially be a published author, self-published or no, it changes everything. It opens so many more opportunities for me and for this show. I'm not going to keep you long before we get into the episode. Special shout out to Jess and Dekota for being the first voice actors on this season of the podcast. They will be returning for additional episodes. I'm not going to say much about that for fear of spoilers, but they will be returning. And hopefully I can get them to come and talk about the lesson / statistics at the end of the episode with me, or just get their opinion on the story or their characters in future episodes. I don't know, it just sounds like a cool way to spice up these little talking sections. But we'll see. For now, let's send you over to Ring Around the Dandy, Round 1. Ring Around the Dandy. Round 1. Narrated by the author. The vocal performance of Nicole is done by Jessica Booher. The vocal performance of George by Dekota Ronk. The spotlights boomed as they turned on within the virtual ceiling and shed their lights on the contestants. Nicole, George, and Jacob were behind podiums labeled with each of their names. Their heads were enveloped in burlap sacks. V.I.M entered the room, however. Rather than an animated flower stuck in the black and white past, the flower was now a CGI creation, apt to give all the little kitties a psychological fit. His stem was now a thick stalk made from twisted vines, and as he moved, they acted as exposed tendons pulling and contracting with each jerky motion. The dandelion's white tufts seemed to sway, as if they were a flame dancing in the night. Yet, they seemed as if they were barely clinging to the top of his head. Then, there was the horrid face. The vines from which it was made were convulsing, struggling to keep the form of a flat plate to support the bulbous, bloodshot eyes. It seemed to rearrange every time the neck turned, and in spots there were tiny, worm-like tendrils wriggling towards the viewer. Finally, the mouth, a wicked snarl inside that plate, fitted with jagged, triangular teeth and oddly fleshy gums.
Let's get a closer look at each of the three players, shall we?
As V.I.M spoke, his eyes darted side to side, up and down, and looked as if they were going to fall from the contorting face.
I'd like to know who you are rooting for.
There was no applause, nor laugh track. Instead, there was nothingness. There was an eerie silence that left the audience to focus on V.I.M, who drooled a green sap from the corner of his mouth. Also, the rustling, the sound of 3 struggling humans who had been tied to their podiums. Behind each of them was a backdrop, over the concrete wall, meant to highlight what V.I.M would call an illustrious career. In the center of each of their backdrops there was a large scrolling sign, which also contained their names. They matched the signs on the front of their podiums in color.
Let's start with Nicole,
said V.I.M, which caused the sack upon her head to come off on its own accord. She had beautiful brown hair, which looked incredibly neat despite the chaos of the situation. Her wide green eyes were set behind a small, button-sized nose, and the skin of her cheeks were blushing from the things she saw over her shoulder on the wall behind her. The word Nicole scrolled behind her repeatedly in bright pink. This was followed by a tag, which appeared to be a link to the woman's page. The background, too, was pink and was covered in scandalous photos, 1 with red lace, 1 with green, 3 with blue. She looked around at the virtual reality, praying to the heavens above that the monstrosity in front of her was just a dream.
What is this?
She cried.
Don't cry, Nicole. I offer a chance at redemption. You see, media is not a toy, and you have been playing with it an awful lot, haven't you?
I don't know what you're talking about. I have to wake up. I have to wake up!
She pulled on the podium, but it did not budge. There was something anchoring it to the ground. An expression of pain struck her face, which led her to the conclusion that the flower was not a dream.
How are you real?
She asked, still pulling at the ropes tied around her wrists.
Why am I able to feel this?
You are correct in assuming this isn't reality, but the consequences are real, darling.
If Dandy had been the one speaking, the comment would have sounded sweet and caring, but from the monstrous version, it sounded much like a predator lurking in a van at a nearby school.
Your body is chained somewhere discreet, and on your head is a pair of goggles. Also, on your body is a haptic vest, which allows you to feel those binds wrapped around your wrists. You may be thinking, how can the vest hurt my hands and my wrist if it isn't even covering that part of my body? Allow me to show you this.
He reached above his head, where a swirling cloud shaped like a mushroom appeared. The cloud started as a fluffy white, shifted to a caustic green, and then turned to a blue that resembled cotton candy.
The vest is connected to your synapses and nervous system using this. You will feel pain anywhere I want you to feel pain, Nicole. Now, do us a favor and remain silent while I introduce the others. Next is George.
V.I.M pointed at her chest, causing the unseen haptic vest to administer an electric shock, causing her to shriek. She kept her sobs to herself, feeling the current not at the surface, but through her very core. She feared that he would do more if she cried aloud. Then, the attention shifted and the sack over George's head removed itself, just as the previous one did, revealing a bald man with a white goatee. The man's early 40s had not been kind, judging by the size of the bags underneath each of his eyes. However, he had never looked more alive. There was a horrified vigor in his eyes, having seen the thing Nicole had spoken to.
What the fuck is going on?
He screamed. By the sound of the hoarseness of his voice, he had been screaming the entire time, but V.I.M's simulation had accounted for such a thing, and the bags had programmed soundproofing.
Oh, George, you should have listened when I was explaining Nicole's situation.
A comedic trombone sounded from an unseen source above them. The note wasn't lively, only a dead drag of breath. The entity that used to be a friendly flower stared with empty eyes.
Please be quiet while I do your introduction.
I won't be fucking quiet. Let me out, you sick fuck. I swear when my lawyers hear about this.
The man suddenly stopped. The same seizing shock that had claimed Nicole's ability to speak had now claimed him.
Oh, buddy, that sort of behavior will ruin our game. If you do not stop all that racket after the shock, you will have to start the game with a penalty.
The thing crawled across the floor with extended vines, looking like a verdant gorilla. It stopped right in front of him, its face working desperately to keep its shape. An eye drooped, the smile spun, and each maneuver was accompanied by a green slime. He blinked, his eyes halting from their lazy deviation, and the shock being administered to the man stopped. He took one breath and continued to yell at the flower.
I swear, you let me out of here before...
The shock began again, causing him to freeze in place, with his mouth hung agape.
I tried to play nice, but I guess I'm going to have to weed it out of you.
A mechanical arm lowered itself from the ceiling, and in the grips of the two-pronged hand was a blue, adjustable wrench. It clicked like a menacing pair of tongs before it reached into the mouth of the man and grabbed the tooth. The mechanical stress from the arm pulling caused a new pain within George. Though his tooth hadn't come from his mouth in the real world, all the pain receptors were activated by the vest on his chained body. The wrench, feeling the resistance of the man bound to the podium, began to wiggle up and down, left and right, like it was playing tug-of-war with a territorial hound. Then, with a sudden release of stress, the wrench pulled the tooth free. There was a splatter of blood, which stained the front of the podium, partially covering his name. The name behind him, which scrolled by on the screen, remained clean on a field of green. Around it, Polaroids of George handing his energy drink to people on the street. However, these were not ancient technology, which need to be shaken after printed. They were simply windows into the videos on his streaming channel. Even the noises of the video could be faintly heard.
I am here today with a random stranger.
Said George, in the top left Polaroid.
Random stranger, have you ever tried devil's juice?
No, I haven't, said the obviously paid voice actor. The energy drink was handed over to the actor, who drank it with a smile. Now that's delicious and healthy. The rest of the wall was more of the same. There were children trying the drink, single mothers, people of all ethnicities, and every other diverse keyword the man could use for advertisement. The entire thing was a picture of capitalistic manipulation and meant to look intentionally scummy. V.I.M moved onward to the third and final contestant, releasing George from his paralysis.
Now that George is going to remain quiet, why don't we meet our third contestant, Jacob?
Once more, the hood removed itself on its own accord. The man with the spiked brown hair and bright blue eyes had heard the commotion of the other two introductions and decided to remain silent once he saw the blood splatter from the center podium.
Hello, Jacob. Do you want to explain why you were here?
I don't know.
Liar, Jacob. You are lying.
The dandelion's teeth clashed together, mimicking the sound of a whip.
You know why you are here. Just look over your shoulder.
The man, shivering with fear, looked at the yellow panel behind him. All around his name, there were pictures of children sitting in classrooms. I'm a teacher. I didn't do anything wrong.
On the contrary, Jacob, a teacher enjoys the process of teaching kids in a creative way.
V.I.M, like a magician, twirled his twisted fingers in a grandiose gesture, making a book appear. He flipped it to a random page and turned it to face Jacob.
Look at it.
He turned the book to the camera. On the page, all but the introductory sentence was highlighted in green.
This checks plagiarism, Jacob, and it appears that you are scoring just north of 90%. Care to explain?
The man remained silent.
Well, if I suppose the answer is no, we could start a little game. It is a little game I call Ring Around the Dandy. This is not to be confused with another nursery rhyme, kiddies and con men. No, the nursery rhyme is based on lies too. There's no rose to ring around. Do any of you actually know what that song was about?
He paused, leaving only silence once more.
Really? Not even you, teacher? Well, I'll tell you. Children in the 1900s used it as a way to loophole around the Protestants banning the art of dance. But that's not the story I like. The urban legend, the lie, is much juicier.
As the dandelion took his place back in the dark corner of the room, a green string of sap reached the ground and disconnected from his mouth.
It is said that the song represents Black Death, the rosies, or the red pox associated with the disease. Some say they resemble a thumb, but I'm much more like the flower analogy, kiddies. The pocket full of posies is said to represent the pungent flowers that were stuffed at the end of the plague doctor's mask. Finally, the rhyme ends with ashes, ashes, we all fall down. I think we all know what that means.
The empty eyes accompanying the empty smile left silence.
History lesson aside, it's time to start the game. Each of you will take turns spinning the wheel, and you each must take 3 turns. If your body in the real world hasn't killed you from the shock, you will be freed. Nicole, spin the wheel so we can begin.
The camera panned outward, revealing the rest of the room. In front of the 3 podiums, a great wheel lay flat on the ground. It was nearly 20 feet across and was split into thousands of widgets. Each one had text, which was barely legible on retro televisions, inscribed in blood. Nicole looked at it for a moment. She, too, had not seen it before now.
Spin it,
yelled V.I.M. She shrieked like a mouse, then did the flower's bidding. Her hand instinctively reached outward, grabbed the nearest peg, which separated the widgets, and yanked. The large thing clicked menacingly as it pondered her fate. All the while, V.I.M. was singing.
Ring around the dandy, hear the flowers shanty, spinning, clicking, where will it land?
The wheel turned about its axis. Sickening anticipation deep within the hearts of the contestants. Somewhere, on the end of that tunnel, a few parents have found what is going on in their living room and have stopped their children from seeing, but still, thousands of eyes lingered on the screen. The clicking slowed, and the wheel stopped. Nicole couldn't help but cry as she stared at the result.
Oh, it isn't even that bad,
said V.I.M.
This is merely just commentary that must be made, dear. For those of you at home that would like to see, here is the result.
The words came to the forefront of the camera, almost as if it had been spray-painted on the lens. It read, "Sell Dandy's Delicacies, the mobile game."
I think this is a rather easy start if you ask me, kiddies. So, show me what you got.
V.I.M. snapped his fingers, and, in an instant, the room changed. Now, there was only V.I.M. and Nicole standing under the spotlight in a room full of props. Then, another light flicked overhead, revealing the live studio audience that had booed and cheered for them from the shadows. They weren't people. Well, at least not real ones. Scattered about a makeshift bleacher section were mannequins dressed in dandy merchandise. Each of their faces seemed to be sewn, such that their mouths and eyes were a series of black X's.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let me explain to you how this works.
The mannequins jerkily moved their hands as well as their legs and necks as they applauded. It was as if their animation was a glitch in the code.
The crowd here is going to judge your advertisement. Think of them as statistics for viewer engagement. And the more engagement you get, the more you show up in the algorithm. The rest of this random nonsense are props, which you can utilize for.
He turned and winked at the camera.
Maximum viewership. For your product information, all you have to do is look at the screen above the crowd. Begin whenever you are ready.
V.I.M. began to back away into the darkness of the corner, but remembered something.
I almost forgot. The viewers at home need the ability to see, so I present to you the engagement meter.
A ramp-shaped meter showed up on the screen as V.I.M. backed away once more. It was yellow on the left-hand side, which was the shortest side, and red on the right. It, the crowd, and the flower waited patiently as Nicole was left in the spotlight. She looked up above the crowd, and suddenly a screen appeared, showing an advertisement she was meant to improve upon. "Dandy's Mobile Bakery," said the screen excitedly. As it spoke, there was a grainy image of Dandy in his apron. "Dandy's ingredients are spread across the world, and it's up to you to find them, collect them, and use them to upgrade your bakery." The image switched to a random actor playing the game. They were utilizing their phone's camera to look for ingredients hiding in the real world. "This idle mobile game takes the stakes to an all-new level with over 1,000 collectible recipes." The screen rapidly scrolled through an ever-expanding list of baked goods before going black. Nicole stood in the center of the room, unable to move. She half-heartedly looked around the props before speaking.
I can't do this.
Oh, Nicole, need I remind you of the penalty that our other contestant suffered?
There was no need for him to explain what had happened. Her lower lip had quivered in fear as the man's tooth was ripped from his head. She shook her head and took a few tentative steps towards the nearest box. All that was left was eerie silence, a call from nobody at the end of that dark tunnel, and she had to make someone applaud in the void. She found herself thinking of different ways to draw viewership for a baking game, and stumbled across a box containing pots, pans, and a rolling pin. She took the rolling pin from the box and moved to the costume section of the props. There, she found an endless closet filled with traditional garb, scandalous things that could be barely considered clothing, and everything in between. She donned an apron and took center stage. She took one deep breath, tried to remove the shakiness from her voice, and added a soothing tone.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I find myself in the kitchen far too often, and my husband says I never get outside. That's why I chose to take the love of baking on the road with Dandy's Mobile Baking. With over 1,000 recipes, I find myself wondering...
She trailed off, losing her train of thought, which caused her to look at the ground nervously. She knew what awaited her if the meter didn't fill the whole way.
Hey, that's not so bad for a first attempt,
said V.I.M as he wiped green sap from his contorting mouth.
Let's see what the crowd thinks.
All at once, the mannequins jerked into a hostile pose, their smiling X's turned to booing O's, and they cupped their hands around their mouths to make known their disappointment at intolerable volume. The meter on the screen filled 10% of the way before coming to a stop. As it ascended, a slide whistle drew a long note, and when it stopped, there was a sound of someone tripping over a drum set.
Nicole, that was terrible. Did you not hear my explanation? You must use your talents that brought you here, Nicole.
He looked her up and down with predatory eyes. She was crying again, this time attempting to hide her already hidden features.
No, I can't show this to children. Are you crazy?
We will see how you feel in a moment. Announcer, bring on the next punishment.
Well, V.I.M, it seems that Nicole has just won herself an all-expenses-paid trip to the spa. The voice was the same voice from the sample commercial. When it finished its proclamation, the crowd went crazy. The same appendages that had harmed George returned from the ceiling, grabbing Nicole by the ankles, and picked her up like a bully trying to shake the change from a nerdy child's pocket. As she dangled upside down, another arm came and removed her shoes. Nicole, however, was not ashamed to have them out in public, and V.I.M knew this. Some of her online patrons had requested pictures of them, and she had obliged them. The only difference now was that it wasn't for pleasure. The additional arm grabbed the end of her perfectly polished toenail and ripped violently, severing it from the stem. She shrieked in agony as blood spurted outward and showered the crowd. Then she dropped back to the floor. She was weeping, and she gripped at her foot. Blood was oozing through her fingers, and though she knew it wasn't real, she couldn't help but feel lightheaded.
Nicole,
said V.I.M impatiently.
You can't go back to your podium until you complete your challenge, or you die. Would you like to see the sample again?
She shook as she stood and accidentally wiped blood through her hair as she cleared it from her eyes.
Fuck you, stupid flower.
At this point, she was willing to do whatever was necessary to prevent the pain from happening again. Before she made her second attempt, however, she needed to return to the costume section. As she walked, she favored her foot, and a trail of blood followed. She removed the apron, stripped herself completely naked, and searched for the sluttiest kitchen-themed costume she could find.
This is fucking degrading.
She whispered to herself. However, deep down, she knew that V.I.M had a point. She had told so many children and struggling teens that beauty was on the inside, and, as a result, had become somewhat of a face of getting rid of modern beauty standards. That was, of course, until she began seeking validation from men and women online. No, she wasn't seeking it. She needed it. She craved the attention. Regardless of the flower's fucked up message, she returned to center stage wearing white lace underneath her apron. She pulled down the front of it such that her cleavage was visible to all, and began seductively purring the commercial.
There's something about being in the kitchen that gets me a little too hot.
She said, fanning herself.
If only there was a way to get rid of all this heat. Wait, there is, with Dandy's Mobile Bakery. You can toast your buns anywhere.
She turned, revealing the exposed skin of her left thigh, and then winked. After she felt that she was done, she dropped the act and angrily threw her apron on the ground.
There, are you fucking happy?
The mannequins jerked, but this time there were numerous different cheering poses. The meter filled 80% of the way, which caused V.I.M to smile.
Congratulations, Nicole. You have survived round 1.
He snapped, placing her back at her podium, and himself back in front of the other contestants. The other two had witnessed the entire thing on a screen embedded into the podiums they were tied to, and they looked more horrified than before. That was, except George, had anger present upon his face. It was clear he wanted the opportunity to berate the flower or threaten him with more lawsuits, but he never got the opportunity. As Nicole's chains rebound to her podium, the flower spoke.
Oh, Georgie, do you need a nap? People your age tend to have a better attitude after a nap.
The man ignored the jab, showing a true amount of grit behind a twisted smile.
Is it my turn?
Oh, someone is eager. Well, don't let me stop you. Spin the wheel.
He did. His spin, however, was not full of fear, it was full of anger. The massive thing circled the axis 4 times, before suddenly coming to a halt. All the while the flower was singing.
Ring around the dandy, hear the flower's shanty, gnawing, gnashing, where will it land?
The wheel stopped, revealing a much different challenge compared to Nicole's advertisement. The words on the widget centered themselves on the tube television screen such that the viewer could see them. In bright neon, it read, "Sell us the dandy, double quarter-pounder." George didn't seem enraged or scared. In fact, he smiled through the blood and licked the hole where his tooth used to be.
So let me get this straight. If I win your stupid little flower game, I get to go home?
The smile vanished from V.I.M's face as he approached George's podium. Like he was cutting out the viewer in the crowd, he covered the edge of his mouth such that he could whisper to the man.
If you call it that again, I will rip every last one of your incisors out. Do you hear me?
George's wicked smile didn't vanish. However, there was slight fear behind it. He nodded, then added,
Alright, but just know I can do this with my eyes closed. Making advertisements is in my blood. It's in my DNA.
V.I.M returned the wicked sneer. Then the two of them teleported to the prop room in which Nicole gave her scandalous advertisement. George didn't wait for further instructions. Instead, he began rooting through the props. He grabbed the pan, which Nicole had previously looked at, and searched in 3 boxes underneath it for food to put in it.
There's no burgers,
he said incredulously.
Why would you need food?
How am I supposed to sell fucking burgers if there's no burgers in the commercial?
V.I.M, looking slightly annoyed, flicked his gaunt fingers, placing a dandy double in George's hand from thin air. He took it at a small fold-out table across the room and stood before the crowd of mannequins. He placed the pan on the table and unwrapped the burger. The wrapping was a simple piece of wax paper, illustrated with pictures of Dandy holding his bulging stomach.
Alright,
said George, as if he were directing a scene. He clapped once. This was followed by him wiping the sweat from his bald head and running his sleeve across his mouth to remove another smear of blood.
I need the camera zoomed way the fuck in.
The camera moved in, and George looked at the screen to check the placement.
Yep, that's good right there.
George, do you not wish to see the sample?
I don't need your handout. Let me fucking do this.
He placed himself behind the table. With elegance, he dropped the burger piece by piece into the skillet. First, the bun landed, then the burger, then the cheese, then another burger. One by one, they stacked on top of each other, and as if the camera knew what George was thinking, it played in slow motion on the screen. Finally, the screen panned to George's face.
Hello, Dandy's Delicacies presents you an all-new way to enjoy the beef.
He pointed at the screen, almost demanding the viewer to buy the burger.
If you don't get your head out of your ass and enjoy this burger, I'm gonna jam it down your throat myself. Take it from me, the Devil Juice fanatic.
He crumbled the wrapper and threw it at the camera. He took a deep breath, and after a few moments of silence, the crowd shifted to their stance of applause. The triangular meter grew and filled the entire way. George smiled at the flower, knowing he had bested the beast. V.I.M looked angry, looked ready to pull him from his roots, but continued with the game. He teleported the both of them back to the podium and moved to the third contestant, who was sobbing.
Round 1 ends with you, Jacob. You are still awfully quiet. None of the little ones can hear your call. Do you wish to say something?
Jacob remained silent.
No. Then I suggest you spin the wheel.
Jacob reached outward with a tentative hand and placed his hand on it, but dared not give it a spin. His hands were quivering, dripping with sweat.
Spin the wheel, Jacob. Spin the wheel.
He shook his head as he sobbed and stared downward at his podium. Then he spun the wheel.
Ring around the dandy. Hear the flowers shanty. Bleeding, crying. Where will it land?
The flower was watching with the utmost obsession. His eyes spun around and around, following the widget. And when it finally stopped, the flower smiled wider than it ever had before. It licked its lip with a tentacle-like tongue.
Oh, it's going to be good,
it said. They all looked at the wheel. It read, "Sell the Dandy Weight Loss Supplement." The man gulped as he teleported into the prop room. He had never done a commercial. Every video package of his was strung together pieces of lecture. He looked at the mannequins, and to his feet, tears falling from his face.
You seem much less confident than your competitors, Jacob,
snarled V.I.M.
It seems like seeing a sample may be a good idea.
The thing extended its vine toward the screen in a pointing motion. The screen flickered once before revealing the advertisement. An animated pitcher plant, purple and plump, showed up on the screen. He held his vine appendages over his stomach as he walked. The sound of a tuba followed in his footsteps. Then, suddenly, he realized there was a camera watching him. He turned, made eye contact with the camera, and wiped his sweat from his leaf-like brow. "It doesn't matter how much I work out, this belly fat just seems to stick to my stem." Dandy suddenly swung into frame and landed just in front of the plant.
"Well, Perry, it seems that you have had one too many bugs. Truth is, if you want to shed those pesky pitcher plant pounds, then you need a supplement. Try Dandy's Dietary Dose, a weight loss supplement. Good for plants and humans too."
Dandy turned and winked at the camera, which froze on his face. As it remained suspended, a quick scrolling paragraph of text went across the screen. A narrator, speaking much too quickly, read this paragraph. Side effects include, but are not limited to, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, heartburn, gas, appetite loss, internal bleeding, intestinal damage, or liver failure. If you notice any of these side effects, contact a medical care provider immediately. Dandy's Dietary Dose is not a suitable product for plants. The supplement in crops has resulted in produce that causes the listed side effects. Dandy unfroze and handed the pill bottle to Perry, the pitcher plant.
"Take one a day to keep the Dandy doctor away."
"Thanks, Dandy," exclaimed Perry. The screen cut to Perry on a treadmill, looking extremely fit. There was a headband holding the opening of the plant closed, and small muscles illustrated within the vines, acting as arms. "I feel my roots getting stronger." The commercial faded to blackness.
Alrighty, Jacob. It's your turn.
Vim tossed the man a small bottle of pills, which had the flower's face in the cap.
Don't forget your ad doesn't count unless you present the side effects for pharmaceuticals.
Jacob tentatively walked to the costume section and found a set of scrubs. He slowly placed them over his clothes and removed the moisture from his eyes once more. Despite all the stress of the augmented reality around him and the horrors he had seen, he gave it his best effort. He presented it well, he gestured to the bottle, and he even read the side effects the commercial had listed. However, there was some bias that the flower clearly had toward the man. And when the meter began to fill, it stopped only a quarter of the way up. The mannequins booed.
Oh, Jacob, don't you see? You have to read it faster. We don't want people to actually realize what this stuff does. Try again.
Jacob nodded nervously. Okay, I can do better.
Not so fast.
The wicked smile returned.
It's punishment time first. Do you know what they used to do in schools when the children misbehaved, Jacob?
Before he could answer, Vim snapped his fingers, placing a ruler in his hand, and whipped the back of the man's hand. A loud crack exploded throughout the room, causing the man to yelp and stumble backwards.
Now, do it again,
said Vim. The man did as he was asked. He nervously presented the medication, but when he got to the side effects, he sped up. However, halfway through the list, he fumbled through his words. Whack.
Again.
Jacob tried again, but this time was unable to choke out his pain. There was a slight hyperventilation stuck in his throat. Whack.
Again, thief.
Jacob tried again, and again he fumbled through the side effects. Whack.
Again.
This went on for what seemed like an eternity. Over and over, Jacob got through the commercial, only to be rewarded with another set of parallel lines on his arms. The welts were deep and bled in steady streams. By the 10th time he had presented the ad, the pill bottle in his hands was illegible. However, he never gave up. He still tried to force himself to give the advertisement exactly the way the flower had wanted it.
Whack. Again,
said Vim for the 11th time. No, that one was perfect, pleaded Jacob. He fell to his knees and crawled to the feet of the flower. Please, just let me pass. That was good. Vim hated the pandering, especially from him, the thief, the plagiarist.
You don't learn your lesson, do you? I suppose we'll make the punishment a bit more intense.
The flower licked at the wriggling things in its face. Then the ruler fell from his vines. Instead of using a piece of wood, he elected to whip the man again with the length of his arm. The man, who was on his knees pleading for forgiveness, was in the perfect position for the flower to strike him in the back. The crack of the vine whip was twice as loud as the ruler. Jacob flipped on his back and cried out in pain. However, the flower wasn't done. Before he struck again, he closed his eyes and concentrated on his arm. The vine whip grew long, red thorns in random directions. Fuck! Yelled Jacob. Please, no more! Give me another shot! The flower paused and nodded his head. Jacob struggled to pull himself to his feet. He grabbed the bottle, which had dropped after the whip struck his back, and stood in the spotlight. Dandy's dietary supplement is not just good for plants, but humans too. If you enjoy being in shape, but also eating those pesky carbohydrates, then this is the supplement for you. Then, with perfect articulation and extreme speed, he named all the side effects. He turned and stared at the crowd. He was certain that he had nailed the advertisement. In fact, he knew it was better than the other two had done. There was nothing the flower could say that was negative about it. Then, to his complete dismay, the booing O's came over the mannequins once more. What? No! Yelled Jacob. No, that was perfect!
Sorry, thief. Your blood is covering the products.
He looked down to the bottle in his hand. The blood from his arms had run down and drowned the flower on the cap, leaving nothing but a nondescript pill bottle in his hands. No, you did that to me. That shouldn't be counted as a penalty. I did. Before he could finish, his voice got caught in his throat. The thorn or whip had struck him in the back, making yet another crack. Rather than bouncing off and falling to the floor, however, the thing stuck to him like a vicious piece of Velcro. He fell to his knees, his arms quivering, trying to shake away the pain. The sting faded after a moment, and just as he was about to breathe again, the flower ripped away the whip. A few bits of flesh went with it, splattering the floor in gore.
You have run out of chances, thief,
said V.I.M. Then he cracked the thorn whip across the man's face. When he pulled away this time, the flesh of the man's cheek sloughed off onto the floor, leaving his eye to droop and his tongue to lick at the bloody, empty hole. He held his hands up and silently prayed to a god that wasn't there. Gods don't exist in virtual reality. How could a god save someone from an injury that only existed in the mind of the man and the viewer watching from that endless tunnel? As he begged for mercy, the thorny arm of the flower struck the man in the mouth, and when he pulled the verdant flail away again, the man's tongue plopped on the floor alongside the flesh of his cheek. Then the lights went out in Jacob's eyes. He fell forward, his head colliding with the ground.
I suppose that this concludes the first round,
said V.I.M., his wriggling chest heaving with excitement. And welcome back. Thus concludes the first round, and you will see our two voice actors again in the second round. So they will not be joining me for this segment of the podcast. However, I do have statistics for you, like I usually do. Actually, you know what? This is the first time I've done this in a while, because the last 3-4 episodes I've done haven't had a lesson, because we did 2 episodes of Heaper, the introduction to this, and Nightmares of a Shepherd. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've had to do research for this portion of the podcast. Regardless, let's get into it. So I've been going through this article from journalism.university on the ethics and laws / ethical foundations and principles of advertising practices. You may be wondering why it matters. Well, that is the core subject at the top of this article. It says, advertising is not just about selling a product. It shapes culture, influences values, and tells people what is desirable, beautiful, or successful. Because of this immense power, the Institute for Advertising Ethics emphasizes that advertising professionals share a common objective of truth and high ethical standards in serving the public. When a brand lies or misleads consumers, that may secure a quick sale, but they erode the most valuable assets any business can have, consumer trust. Once trust is broken, especially in the age of social media where news travels instantly, rebuilding a brand's reputation becomes increasingly difficult and expensive. Ethical advertising, therefore, is not merely a moral obligation, it's a fundamental business strategy for long-term success. Now, you may be wondering, why is this important to the Shepherd's Cast? How is this something that is important to talk about compared to the last season when we talked about very personal things like mental disorders, diseases, and addictions? The truth is, it's not as important, but it is important to realize that there's still a good message here to point out the flaws in, or what some people consider flaws in, the advertisements in our society versus what it can do to help small businesses is fundamentally important to talk about. And you're going to notice a lot of those themes this season. I'm not specifically saying, oh, advertising is bad for society or advertising is good for society. I'm simply pointing out that there are ethics to these things, and you are open to make your own distinction between what is right and what is wrong. But once again, you will have a interesting story that comes to mind when you debate these things, and that's always been the point of this podcast, is to have an interesting story to relate to something. So next time you get targeted ads for a mobile game that makes very obnoxious commercials that I won't say the name of, think about this. Think about this story. Think about V.I.M. Think about George. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. This goes on to list the core principles of ethical advertising. truthfulness and honesty, transparency and disclosure, fairness and non-exploitation, social responsibility, and respect for consumer privacy. It also lists some of the common ethical violations. We have misleading and deceptive claims, greenwashing. This would be portraying something as eco-friendly, natural, or green when their actual production processes are not showing that. Then we have emotional manipulation. The article then has a section that I feel is very specific to exactly what we are talking about here on the podcast. It has a advertising and children, a critical ethical concern section. The header here says, perhaps no area of advertising ethics is more sensitive than advertising directing at children. Young children, particularly those that are under the age of 8, lack the cognitive ability to understand the persuasive intent of advertising. They often cannot distinguish between a cartoon show and a commercial for a toy based on that cartoon. That makes them extremely vulnerable to manipulation. Ethical concerns about advertising to children including using pester power, designing ads that encourage children to relentlessly nag their parents for a product, promoting unhealthy habits by using popular cartoon characters to sell sugary cereals and fast food, contributing to childhood obesity, and creating unrealistic expectations by showing toys in a way that is far more exciting than reality. At the heart of this episode, that's what we're talking about here. Dandy is a character that is on everything, including medical commercials that have nothing to do with the show. The idea is that kids, even when there's a serial killer on the screen, are going to go to their parents and be like, hey, do you remember that pharmaceutical that Perry the pitcher plant had taken in this commercial? That forces the parent to think about that inadvertently, or maybe this was their plan all along, is to trick children into telling their parents about this drug without the children even knowing what the drug is. This, of course, according to this article, would be in the realm of moral wrong. As for our 3 contestants, I'm not going to get into what is the moral right and wrong. That is something that could be rather divisive, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions. And do not think that using these 3 specific examples, that being a adult model, an influencer who sells energy drinks, and a person who has AI generated all of their content, is anything to do with my personal beliefs. These are simply 3 good, common examples that are talked about a lot in conversations about this topic. At least when I hear conversations about this topic, these are prime examples of what I hear. And I thought they fit well for the story. I'll leave this article in the description of the episode if you want to take a further look at it. There's a lot more here to dig into. I just scratched the surface of it and explained my reason for writing this story. I think in further episodes we will get some interesting comments from the voice actors who played these characters, which will be a nice spin on this section of the show, and give us more to talk about in future episodes. But for now, I will leave you to ponder. May the flock disperse till we congregate again. Thank you.